Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the September edition of 100 Pictures of Honey. We're very lucky tonight to have, as I was just saying before the recording started, not just one talented Nicole reading poems, but two talented Nicoles reading poems. And we're happy that you're here with us to hear those poems. I encourage you to use the chat to share favorite lines, to cheer, drop those fire emojis in there when you hear that great work. And we also encourage you, since we have only two readers tonight instead of the usual three or four, if you'd like to put questions in the chat, I will try to keep up with those and we'll save them for the end after both readers are done reading. And if we have time and people are willing to stay on, try and get those questions answered. So we're going to get right to what you're here for, which is hearing these two talented people, their work instead of listening to me. So we are going to be starting with Nicole Callihan. I've been an admirer of her work for a long time. It's very difficult to write poems that contain the very realistic honesty, but also a very dreamlike quality. Putting those two things together, I think, is one of Nicole's strengths. Her poems have a rhythm and a flow that is both image and language driven at the same time, which is a difficult trick as well. And I feel when I read her poems, I'm kind of drawn into the world of the poem, and suspended, and then kind of unreeled out of it in a very gentle but interesting way. Nicole is a generous and kind person in the poetry community and in general, and she is the person in our writing group that makes everyone else jealous at what she can create in 30 minutes. At least me anyway. So I'm going to let you hear some of her wonderful work. Nicole.
Thank you, Donna. I'm so happy to be here. I very, I really wanted to do the 100 Pictures of Honey reading for Sugar Ridge, and then I very selfishly was like, and I want to read with Nicole Cooley because I really can't wait to hear from her new book. So it's great. It's great to be here, and thank you all for joining us. So this is Sugar Ridge. And I'm just it's a book that's sort of meant to be read from beginning to end. It doesn't have a lot of one hitters, you know. It's just it I don't know. I'm just gonna read it. Read some of it to you. So thank you. Sugar Ridge. There, the sun did not rise until we'd been up for hours. Then it crowbarred the day, turned the trees from lead to silver, turned the dead to face the river, the night again. The poet told me to go to sleep, wait until I dreamed of an angel, and when the angel speaks, the poet said, listen to her. Notice the color of her dress, blue jean blue, then wake up and write it. Down in the valley all night I slept. I was naked, but I was not cold. And lo, I say unto you, the angel did her bidding. And lo, she offered me a slop jar, and lo, a cat's eye marble, and lo, she told me to be not afraid of the soul, and the grass on the ledge in which I lay made me itch with a violence I'd carry away. If the portrait of the self is a palette on the floor, if the floor is as hard as the night outside, if the night's got nothing on the old man out back, you say self and point to my chest, but what of these trees, this still star-soaked sky? What of the cuts and tongues and tins of meat can be cleaved from the girl on the ridge who in the dark with a cleaver stands. And lo, I say unto you, lo, I say, come with me, lo. Mine. Other mountains had iron or coal, something good. Beneath us we had nothing. We panned for fool's gold, and though it shined, it was not real. And the men who owned what lay beneath our earth pillaged us for many moons, but finding nothing, moved deeper uphill. In West Virginia, they strip her still, layer after layer, dust to dust. Sometimes it's better to be hollow. To have nothing is to have nothing to take. Where? Out past Boone, start taking rights, right at the crook, right at the hairpin, right by the old dead dog bend, right when you see the cross, right when the flowers bloom, when they stop blooming, right when your heart becomes something other to the left of your soul, right when you get brave enough to say soul, right when you stop right here, right-sided, right-minded, right-winged, right-footed, right-dreamed, right there. Class. The external gills typical of amphibians exposed to the environment. If you gargle enough frog eggs, you might learn how to breathe. If you borrow enough cash, you might be able to put enough gas in the tank to get you to town. Oh, stagnant water frog, embryo stink of your stink. Somewhere there's a machine that can look inside and tell you why it hurts. Close. The fog which stitches us in, seams us, makes us seem unseemly, clasping clasps, sewing me into this old blue dress. My love is not, is all tied up. Oh, safely pinned body, unravel, unwind, hot southern, pick me up and deliver me with flowers from evil to grace. Blind girl, blind cat, can't see your hand in front of your face. I keep thinking somebody will save me, but it's hard enough to make it to the store around here, let alone cut coupons, let alone find redemption or a shirt that buttons and is stainless. Inside. You can't blame the land for what dwells inside or what does not bother to dwell, 'cause you ain't got Jesus, nor man, nor love. The sickness rises to offer you company. Love's too many hairpins away. The darkness inside still blooms. Darkness sprouts hair and teeth and baby fingernails. And at first you feel better. You feel good because you finally got something at all. Walking in the hills, the sickness sings you hymns in bed at night. It makes you utter your prayers. So when it sours, you can't hate its stink because it comes from your very you, your only you, your ugly little you. Remedy. She's got answers to questions you didn't know you had. How to have a baby, how to get rid of a baby, what to do if you get cauliflowers on your privates, sassafras, spearmint, lard, snake root, cut grass, kerosene, ginger, fox, worms. It's 2 parts brown sugar, 1 part turpentine, sister bunny, pie maker, and healer. If body is to body as body is to soul, to lump in your throat, to belly, thigh, lump, titty, lump of clay of grace. Everybody knows not to sweep under the bed of the sick, but here's something else. Let the birds use your hair for the nest and you'll go crazy. If this happens, tie a string around a crabapple tree. There in its shade, bury your dreams. Smoke. The old man's knee was a horse, and the horse was named Smoke, and the old man's sweater was made of smoke, and his fingers and his face. And if you breathe just right, you're smoke too. The horses got so hungry they started eating the trees, but the trees had no more fruit than the bowls that were earthen, empty, and blue. A sky tipped up on its hind legs, bucking and mad, Mustang moon back room. If you dig deep enough into the ashtray, you might find something worth smoking. Lord, I, the undersigned, have been more evil than I would like to admit in these papers. These papers themselves are dressed in the devil's clothes, and I in the devil's wife's sweater, and in the pants of the devil's wife's best friend, who, seeing that I had bled myself in church one Sunday, showered me with maxi pads, elastic bands, panties beggar panties bigger than all the hills. Oh, Jesus, I don't know how much smaller and weaker you could have made me. Can't tell love from pity, but if to inherit the earth is this, I do not want the earth. Dream. For days I soured on dreams. On the fifth, I wrapped the filth around me and made peace with what was left of myself. In the dream, walked 1,000 miles to knock on my own door and got no answer. When I tried the knob, I let myself in once, did nothing more than fall asleep on the pallet in which I was already sleeping. What happens when the body we discover is our own? After the sixth night, I rose and listened to the back room where the old man slept. Light would come, I told myself, and so I swept the corners good and hard. Crimes. Case of the one-eyed snake, case of the pickled heart, case of the willies, of the blues, case of the beat drunk down, of the girl against the old man, against the girl, against the girl. House. Not that the house still stands, but that it ever stood. Not that the tree that rots rots, but that it ever bloomed. We were an accidental people. Our accidental hands built accidental houses with accidental wood. I liked to sit and watch the old man sweat and hope he'd fall down river, downstream, down home, down, Delhi, down. The only way to remember the West is to remember where you last spotted the sun. Smoke rises from the chimney, from the mill, and from that which smolders, for that which is nearly dead still burns hot and deep. Glad. But everything wasn't always terrible. I'd save my dimes and stacks of tin to buy math workbooks. And sometimes the sky got so blue I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. To walk along a river, even if you have never walked along another river, is to know other rivers. To find a longing for something is to long to press that shapelessness into your palm under your tongue, is to begin to understand its contours in the snow. Playing dead is to feel the fast flicker of being. Flight. Must have been spring. Everything was shining with meltedness, and I met Malachi by the river. First, it seemed he was just splitting a chicken, and the looking itself gnawed at my hunger. But he'd strung the feathers on clothesline. There on the ground in a sawed-off sun-drop bottle, a robin's egg, blood and feathers from all sorts of bird, figuring out how to fly, Malachi said. You should be ashamed of yourself, I told him. Then I let him kiss my neck a little. Then we sat in shame together and smoked between the sky. Interrupt, rupture, rapture, a knock on the door, nothing but wind, back to sleep, baby face, back to bed, belly to the pallet, back to the creak, groan of the floor, back home, forget back home, back here, but back home you got a lock of hair you call hers, but it's yours really, and not even a lock but mess pulled from a brush. Even if it was a lock, it wouldn't have a soul. Escape. If self is to self as self is to other, then the crawl space in which the self has hunkered is the crawl space in which the self will stay. Cat stench and rain and moldy wrapping paper. Must have been a time somebody thought to make something pretty. If the words in the book are the soul salvation, if the soul salvation is the only salve, then may your young self be eclipsed. May you become what you never were. Rock. Water takes granite, granite takes scissors, scissors take paper, paper takes words, words float down river, river takes fish, fish takes worm, worm takes blood, blood takes heart, take heart, girl, woman, take heart, old man, take heart, lice lady, take heart, fucking government. And when you get heart sick of taking heart, take the scissors to your hair, take a hat to hide your head. Let all these things settle in the bed of the stream. Amen. Music. Pinpricks of light, of sound, of spinning angry. In the rain, Malachi and I never danced or didn't know what to call it. If there is no music, no steps, then is it dancing? In the forest, body on body, breath on breath, prickle of pine needles, prickle of tingles in the spine, the groin, little groan, little muscle, a head on a shoulder, by a river, a sliver in a body near the shoulder of the road and the mouth of the river and the shoulder of the other and the rhythm within pulsing, pulsing, the wolf's steady heartbeat. Break. It ain't all bad having you around, the old man says, but probably just because I remember eggs and he can't remember much of anything, let alone get us fed, the whole house warm and quiet. You get used to what you get used to. Sometimes you just have to be the self you are, break bread down and buttermilk, wash your supper down, find something akin to forgiveness. Don't worry, soon enough you'll be somebody else. Glory. Of morning dew, of the air, of the earth that was beneath us, earth inside us, how we scooped it with our fingers, how our fingers smelled forever of it and of ourselves, of the spaces between, what could be named, of the wall down river where you can find a hole to stick in what you please, of the please itself, of the pleasing, the please. Oh, this little light of mine, of the shining, the light behind the trees, what seeps inside if you wait long enough and unlearn your stubborn limbs. Epilogue. Years have passed. and I have taken unlikely refuge in the academy. Occupying a small square office, I try to keep my fingernails clean. I do not know how people become people, or really even what a person is. My talk is small, and I remain likely to get distracted by the light. In order to quell my long lived hunger, I give myself strange prompts. One word title, I say. Don't mention the word mother. Who was the youest you can imagine? But what does this I know about that you? Nothing, everything. In these quarters, I am as unseen as I was on Chigger Ridge. Lo, the blinking cursor is the decades-old cat's eye marble knocking around in the slop jar is me.
Thank you, Nicole. Sorry, I was so like engaged. I couldn't find my unmute button. Thank you so much for that beautiful reading. Um, People can now maybe see what I mean about how you're kind of dropped into the world of those poems. Um, and you live there when you're hearing them. Beautiful, beautiful. Um, I I'm wow. And now we get even more wow with Nicole number two. We have coming on Nicole Cooley, who is, again, whose work I've admired for a long time. She has the kind of poetic resume that a lot of people aspire to, 6 books and all the good initials and all the good, places. Um, and so I've been lucky enough to be able to read her work online for quite some time. But I really love her new book. Which explores the grief and loss of a mother, but also explores how grief seeps into both the physical landscape, the world, the physical world we live in, and the emotional landscapes that we inhabit. So now, Nicole number two, Nicole Cooley.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donna, for that lovely introduction. And what a true honor to read with Nicole. That reading was so captivating and haunting and beautiful. And the way you ended, oh my goodness, I loved it. Um, Thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm going to read from my new book. This is it, Mother, Water, Ash. This is a little shout out to the cover artist, who is I grew up in New Orleans. That's a lot what the book is about. The cover artist, Sybil Peretti, I absolutely love her work, and it felt so important to have a living woman New Orleans artist make the cover for me. So I'm going to read some poems from this book and talk about it a little bit. Um, I'll just say a few things about the book before I get going. The book was sparked by my mother's sudden death in March 2018. And with her death, I was brought back to a maybe unlikely or not unlikely source. Hurricane Katrina in 2005. I came back to Hurricane Katrina, a storm that I really believed wedded my mother to the city. She and my father did not evacuate, and there was just a way in which, after Katrina, her relationship to the city was very different. So I'll also say that I, like so many of us, use writing as a way to make sense of my life. And after my mother died, to make sense of it, I wrote pages and pages of terrible prose, literally terrible. I'm not being self-deprecating, raw material. And then I took a look at this mess of this 50 pages of literal junk, and I thought, I wonder if any of this could spark a poem. Could any of this be shaped into a poem? And that's how I write. Writing is the one arena of my life in which I really allow myself to be very messy. So this book started in a very, very messy way. I'm going to start by reading the first poem in the book, which is called On the Mississippi River Levee, Styrofoam Cup in My Hand. And I think the only thing I need to tell you about this poem is that I grew up 2 blocks from the Mississippi. On the Mississippi River Levee, Styrofoam cup in my hand that will disintegrate in 500 years. I drink my coffee, stand in gravel in my church skirt, Black velvet I wore to my mother's funeral 11 days ago. Take a photo of my own shadow on the railroad tracks to Snapchat to my daughters, while this river outside my parents' house is rising higher than in years. Spillways opened, live oaks sunk in mud, grass littered with plastic bags and beer cans. Levy trash, a photo essay, my former self might think. That self so well versed in irony, that careful daughter who would take notes, then shut her notebook. Now on the levee, a white truck speeds by too fast. Maybe a man who picks up shifts on rigs for extra money. And in a former life, I'd write a poem about how that man might be dangerous to my daughters. Now I write nothing. I'm here to walk off my restless sadness, to walk off my mother's voice, years after the storm when the city flooded, telling me she will never leave New Orleans, no matter how high water rises or how many levees breach, telling me she will die in her house. No evacuations, no hospitals. Now I know grief has its own typography. Mine is this city and this coast. So the second poem I want to read is also about a hurricane. And this is also ironic because Hurricane Francine just hit the Louisiana coast last night and today. And many people in the city still have no power, and there's flooding everywhere. But unbelievably, on August 29th, 2021, Hurricane Ida hit the same day as Katrina hit in 2005. 16 years between these two hurricanes on the same day. And this poem is about that. It's called 16 Years to the Day Another Hurricane Reverses. 16 years to the day another hurricane reverses the Mississippi's course. My father waits in our house beside the river, and I dream my mother drowning, water closing over her head. In my dreams, she is always dying in the too warm Gulf, then pricked alive again, fairy tale spindle. My friends and I text each other to describe dreams in which our mothers ask us why they're dead. New Orleans is the place around which I uselessly orbit. After Katrina, typing my mother's name, missing person Jackie Cooley into search engines. 16 years ago, my daughters asked, "What is a hurricane's eye? What can it see?" Then my mother was alive, refusing to leave the city. Now I text my father, "How high is the water? Are there tornadoes?" Phone and electric out. I wish for a slick of river to spare our house. While in a new dream about my mother, she thrashes to the Gulf's sand floor, where she can't burn or come apart. So the book is also punctuated by short, untitled poems that address the environmental crisis of the Gulf Coast. And I wrote a whole book about Hurricane Katrina that was published in 2010, Breach, that came out also with LSU. And during that time, I did a lot of research about the environmental crisis of the Gulf Coast in Louisiana, but I realized that a really important antecedent for all of my thinking about Louisiana growing up and now as an adult was a Louisiana ecology class I took in high school, in which we went to barrier islands and waded in rivers and lakes and investigated basically why the Gulf Coast was disappearing. And in those days, it was disappearing at a much lower rate than it is now. So this is one of the short untitled poems that punctuates the manuscript about that. Once the coastline spoke, I planned to disappear and tell you nothing. Geographic body etched on a map. Count the houses where families live, where a river splinters, saltwater surges through a channel built for ships and oil, dredged and levied. Children die. To myself, I spoke. You need to be less daughter. You need to go home to your own daughters, to be a mother, to stop walking the Mississippi's edge. But the Gulf is burning. Marshes disappearing, sidewalk buckling like a choking throat. The coastline advises, count my waves. Count the days your mother has been gone. Count the hurricanes, the floods, the times the water unspooled and didn't drown the town. So also in this book, I have some poems which are about objects that belong to my mother, some of which I still have, some of which I don't. And this is a poem called My Mother's Ashtray, which is about one of her objects, which I still have on the porch underneath the couch. I can't get rid of it. So I'll just read the poem. My Mother's Ashtray. My mother's ashtray with the last of her DNA, gold clamshell I snapped shut, now shoved under my couch to avoid, also to save. While I want my mother to return to offer me a list of how I failed to snip a strand of her hair at the funeral home for safekeeping. How I never wore the skirts she sewed after my first love left. How she visited to help with my babies, and I refused to let her smoke in the house. Demanded she sit on the cold porch with the ashtray. Without her now, I am back at the dark corner of myself, the old urge to step out of my body, drop it on the floor like a crumpled dress, skip a meal, run harder as I lie on the floor of my daughter's room, fevered and finally asleep, too old for this. In the middle of the night, I will my mother to come back, slip the ashtray out from underneath the couch. Ashtray I won't empty. Should I save the butts her lips once touched? Their own museum exhibit. She won't return, which means I fail my mother. We called the skirts she made the guilt skirts. They still hang, folded stiff on a hanger, besides my girls' dresses and her nightgowns my father gave me. I know my mother kept the ashtray secret from my daughters, under the couch, ashed and ready, just as I collect my teenage daughter's baby clothes in a box. Ruffled toddler dress, blue sleep sack, just as I wear her black raincoat now, as if my body could ever be equivalent to hers. I flip the ashtray open like a beer can or a jewelry box, a bed warmer to be held against a hearth fire. I research ashtrays on eBay to avoid myself, to not finish this poem, in which my mother is finally dead and I have the evidence in my house, this stick handle like a wrist. Next, I want to read the short title poem of the manuscript, Mother Water Ash. This manuscript was one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me. It's never happened before, where I thought of the title of the whole thing before I wrote this poem. And then I wrote the poem having had titled the entire manuscript. And I realized this poem is about a couple of things that I come back to a lot in my work. One is the Mississippi and the mother, and also my experience living in New York City. I had recently moved to New York when 9/11 happened, and I had recently had a baby, my oldest daughter, and all of that's kind of swirling around in this poem, as well as the fact that I teach in Queens, and so there's a little of the Queens New York landscape here, the Grand Central Parkway, which is a highway, and Flushing Meadows Park, which is a place where Queens hosted two different World's Fairs in the 20th century. So here is Mother Water Ash. Mother gone to ash, river gone to drowned. I don't live here anymore, as my friends remind. Now I walk the edge of the Grand Central Parkway, Flushing Meadows Park, World's Fair gone dark. What is ashed and drowned? What is abandoned? Mother gone. Drowned in her body the night she died alone in New Orleans. She ashed her cigarette, then left us. Did I go dark when the N train lost power on my way home, while the burning threaded through my baby's hair? City doused in ash, impossible to keep the inside out. River Road beside my parents' house leads to Cancer Alley. Mother gone, but once with her, I drove through the drowned city, 2 months after the storm. Yellowed grass, houses gone, the road a slur of empty. Is it any wonder I followed her advice to subtract myself? Good daughter always, till I'm not. Did I go dark when she left me? When will my daughters? while my mother's mouth is all slick black feathers. And I'm going to read two more pieces. This is another short, untitled piece about the environment and the coast. Could the California fires ever fill the Mississippi with ash? Slow burn on another coast. Could I snip my mother's hair, seal in a locket, skip the stone of it across the river, or nestle a tangle in a sparrow's nest? There is my mother's body, and then there is the dead zone. Meanwhile, the heat is record this year. Meanwhile, scientists predict the summer dead zone in the Gulf will be the biggest in our history. Meanwhile, the chemicals spilled into the Atchafalaya, the Mississippi, runoff from the Midwest floods, could cover nearly 8,800 square miles. Meanwhile, the dead zone is the size of New Jersey. So my last poem is a little bit different. It is called After My Mother Dies, I Crave the 70s. I realized that strangely, I wrote a number of poems in this book while eating deviled eggs. And I'm not sure why. I haven't had them very often since, but it really made me think. And I started thinking about deviled eggs. I started thinking about the 70s and my childhood and what did it mean to crave all those things again. So here's my final poem. After my mother dies, I crave the 70s. First, the foods. Deviled eggs scattered with paprika. A Bloody Mary, celery stuck in the center of the glass, a cheese log studded with cloves, bowl of green goddess dressing. All of the decade's weird nourishment, foods I never ate as a child. Yet now I ache stupidly for the cold orb of that egg, its shirred and dusted yolk. And then I want to go running in the New Orleans park with my Walkman, sweaty styrofoam slipping from my ears, rectangular weight in my hand. I want to dial a rotary phone and call my mother back. And when I find her, she and I will watch Clute and Midnight Cowboy together on our fiberglass green and yellow couch. Crave, from the Old English, meaning ask, implore, demand by right. My mother and I are back at the Winn-Dixie on the highway, and she is younger than I am now, and I am asking for a mood ring from the gumball machine. Crave, perhaps related to craft in its base sense of power. And now I want my mother to be my sister, which is ridiculous, as I have a sister, and I am raising two sisters in my other life as a mother. Meanwhile, I'm back in our living room in New Orleans, and my mother and I are shoving the particle board bookcases against the wall and flipping open our tab cans. I want my cheap acrylic turtleneck back. I want my IBM Selectric to type my middle school papers, my Betamax, my 8-track tapes, my early Billy Joel. After we rearrange the living room in the hopes of changing our lives, my mother and I fold a paper fortune teller together and I quiz her. Yes, no, maybe. She gives no good answers. But after all, she is back from the dead. In the other world, which is this one, my daughters have the box of my parents' Ouija board and are scooting the planchette over cardboard late at night while my husband and I sleep upstairs. Crave, to long for, eagerly desire, to ask very earnestly. Deviled eggs were first made in ancient Rome, where it was said, from eggs to apples, meaning from a beginning to its end in the course of a meal. Eggs, the color of the couch my mother and I sat on when I believed she would never die. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much. I mean, both of these readings, such a sense of place and time, um, and what is treasured and what is lost. Really beautiful. Both of you, thank you so much. We have a little bit of time if anybody has a question. I didn't see any come up during the reading. If I'll watch for just a minute while we're waiting, I'll just remind people that are here of the last couple events of the year. October 15th with Joan Kwan Glass, KB Brookins, and Megan Merchant. Sunday, November 24th, a reading conversation with Dana Delabovi and Molly Peacock. And then maybe a few changes to the series next year. So stay tuned. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook to keep up with what's going on. I want to thank Nicole and Nicole again. I had no doubt that this was going to be a beautiful reading. I was not wrong. And judging by the comments in the chat, I'm not the only one who feels that way. So I don't see any questions though. So I'm going to stop the recording now. And thank you all so much for being here on this lovely evening in September.